Right, is that working now for everyone to see the correct view? Or no?
Well, it's still showing up as not in presenter mode, but you know,
honestly, I've never had this problem before, so today is, of course, the day. Amazing. There we go.
Oh yeah, right. That works great. Yep.
And now we just had a lesson of hopefully what won't happen anymore. But thank you all for joining us for, now it doesn't want to, there. For the third day of our combined Atlantic Marine Bird and Roseate Tern combined meeting. We're super excited to have you all come to the third day. I know there's been so much great information that we've already gleaned, so hopefully everyone's brain is ready for just a little bit more. And before we get started, I wanted to thank Caleb Spiegel, who helps really coordinate the Atlantic Marine Bird Cooperative, for all his awesome work on the meeting so far, and Suzanne Payton, who is probably all of you already know. She's been working with Roseate Terns for well over a decade, and all of her help as well with this meeting. Just a couple of really quick things for everyone to just think about throughout the meeting. This is really a pretty, open meeting. We want this meeting to be here for all of you to participate, and we want everyone to feel like you can join in and ask questions or bring up topics for discussion. And so this is pretty informal, but when we do have people speaking or giving a talk, if everyone can please turn off their cameras and keep their microphones on mute during that time, that would be really helpful. But we really encourage everyone to turn both of those things back on when we're discussing something. And we really hope to hear from all of you. So whether that be in the chat or verbally, we would love your input. And so we don't want anyone to feel stifled. And so if anyone has a better way of doing that in the future, definitely let us know. For the longer presentations, we're going to help you guys stay a little bit on track. So if you have a 15-minute presentation that you're providing, we will give you a little emoji if you have 3 minutes to go, and one of us will turn on our camera if you have 1 minute to go, just to help you stay on track. Sometimes it's not a big deal, but if you notice one of us coming on camera, just know that you should maybe start getting towards the wrap-up section of your talk. And then everyone feel free to ask questions in the chat. Also, we wanted to note that this meeting is being recorded already. If for some reason you don't want your presentation recorded, just let us know and we can remove that from the recording in the future before it's posted on the AMBC website, which that will happen over the coming weeks. So thanks so much to Caleb and his team for being willing to host this meeting up there so that we can review anything that we may have missed or we want to see again. Just really quick housekeeping for anyone who's not familiar with Teams. All of the buttons you need are in the upper right corner of your Teams screen. So if you click the chat button, which you can see on the left-hand side of the upper right-hand side that looks like a little chat box, that will bring up the box for you. If you no longer want that in your way, you go over to the chat box, which it will now be under the little red telephone icon, and click the X to remove it. Same with participants. If you want to know who is in the meeting, or if you want to, something like that, then you can click this. And then if you want to close it, you need to click the X. If we are having a group discussion and there's a bunch of people who are trying to talk, it's really helpful if you use the raise hand symbol right here. And once you click it, you won't really notice what's happening until you open the people section. It's kind of unfortunate that that's the case. But if you click raise hand and you click people, you'll then see your name at the top of the list with a raised hand next to it. Also, you'll notice that it pops up saying there's something happening over here. But anyway, if it's confusing to you, feel free to type in the chat and we'll make sure we get to you also. And then finally, here is where your camera and microphone is. So be sure to have those turned off while we're presenting, and then turn at least the camera back on until you're ready to speak when we're having a group discussion. And if for some reason you need to share your screen, which many of you probably will, here's the share button, and we can help you through that if we have issues. And then if for some reason you need to leave the meeting, feel free to hit that leave button. And then if you do happen to have any technical issues, Caleb, Suzanne, and I can probably help you, but even better, reaching out to one of these 4 people would be the best way to go. And we will put a quick image of this slide in the chat so that you have that available for you. Boop, 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 boop. Here we go. And yeah, so today we're going to be starting off with our colony updates so we can learn what's been going on out there throughout the region on our nesting colonies. Then we'll have a short break after all that exciting information, and then we'll move on to a little bit more with colony presentations, research-based presentations on tern colonies. And then we'll transition into talking about the Roseate tern recovery process and data sharing, which I know is really relevant to a lot of you on top of all the good colony stuff. Then we'll head out to lunch for about an hour. It's a little bit later lunch. And then we'll come back and start a pretty heavy research-focused tracking studies session. Oops, I guess I'm saying a word there, but we had a tracking study session yesterday, as probably hopefully a lot of you saw, and this one will be really tern focused with a focus on common and roseate terns. And then we'll have a couple of full life cycle talks, and then we will move on to additional discussion topics, including hopefully some conversation about the staging efforts that people have been working on, any wintering work that's upcoming, anything that the Caribbean colonies might want to talk about, and then anything else. And I actually did create a little document for all of us that I'll share in the chat also. Look how exciting this is. It's basically our Roseate Tern meeting parking lot. And this is a great spot for anyone who is interested in just putting an idea, if you have an idea that you either want to talk about later in the meeting or in a future meeting, or just something that you want someone to help you with, or someone to like reach out if they are doing this sort of work and you want to connect. Please take the time to put those ideas and thoughts in this parking lot, and we will go over it either at the end of the meeting or in the future. All right. So with that being said, who's ready to get into some colony talks? I can tell that's everyone. All right, so I will pull up that presentation. One moment. All right.
Good.
So our first
looks good.
Looks good. Yay. Excellent. So for the colony presentations, I have them all combined. But if anyone feels uncomfortable with that and wants to present themselves, please just let me know and I'll close mine out and you can pull it up yourself. So I have us starting here with Ireland. So Brian, you want to get us started and just tell me next when you're ready for the next slide.
Perfect, will do. Hi everyone, great to be here. Yeah, I suppose jump on to next. Next slide. Yeah, so just very quickly, anyone who knows Dr. Steve Newton from Ireland, I'm kind of taken over his role. Steve still works with us, just a lot less as he kind of heads into retirement gradually. I started my career with Birdwatch Ireland working on roseate terns and rockabill, so it's great to 10 plus years later still be working on roseate terns. Next slide. So Rockabill Island, that's our main northwest European roseate tern colony. Conservation efforts since 1989. We have resident wardens on the island throughout the summer. It has 80% of the northwest European population of roseate terns on Rockabill, on that little island there. It's a bit smaller than the size of a football pitch. You guys will be familiar with similar habitats. Main threat is gull predation. That is ongoing and getting worse. Wardens stop people causing any real problems out there. We had minor losses to avian flu in 2023. None in 2024 and a little bit again last year, but minor losses in the grand scheme of things. And one of the things coming down the tracks is a very large wind farm that may or may not get approved. That is very close to Rockabill. Next slide. So that is our timeline since the conservation project started. You'll see in 2025 numbers took a little bit of a dip, but still within range of what we're quite happy with. Given we had a big avian flu outbreak in 2023, given that we still have some predation, we still have over 1,600 pairs, so we're still doing very, very well. Next slide. Productivity, as the colony gets bigger, it's obviously harder to maintain that ratio of nests or breeding attempts to chicks raised. So as the colony gets bigger, you expect productivity to drop off. It's still in and around 1.0 most of the time. Last year, the main problem was gull predation. We had some issues getting out to the island and getting up and running with our conservation efforts, and the gulls took full advantage of that, and that is something we're going to have to address, I suspect, in the near future. But still, just below 0.8 is still pretty good going for kind of one of the poorer years in recent years. Next slide. Just for some context, I suppose, common terns of the other species on Rockabill, they peaked at around 2,000 pairs, not too long ago, 10 plus years ago. They have been declining since, and we do wonder if just Rockabill is past its carrying capacity in terms of the numbers of terns it can support. Common terns are dropping off. There's no other obvious reason for that. Obviously, avian flu then completely devastated them, and numbers have been halved at Rockabill and at multiple other sites. So unfortunately, as the gull problem gets worse, you would like to have plenty more common terns helping with the defenses and stuff like that, but that isn't happening. Next slide. Then our second site in the Republic of Ireland is Ladies Island Lake. It's in the very southeast of the country, and you see those little islands on the lake, and it's the blue one there is the one that hosts the Roseate terns. Again, long-term conservation efforts. This one has wardens going out, every day, keeping an eye on everything. It's about 12% of the Northwest European population. And last year, this site hosted all 5 breeding species of terns that we get in Ireland, which was really, really cool. Again, main threat is gull predation. We do, there's a lot of mammalian predation too, from mustelids, stoats, mink, otters, pine martens, that kind of stuff too, foxes. Wardens prevent disturbance, and there's some predator control too. And again, a similar story for the rosy terns, minor losses to avian flu. Next slide. So that's breeding. Breeding historically these to just report on the total number of nests, which obviously isn't the same as the total number of pairs. More recently, we're trying to get back to recording the total number of kind of primary nests or pairs. So that's why the two graphs are slightly different there. So we have over 250 pairs. You can see it's a pretty gradual linear increase. So again, we're pretty happy with that. Next slide. And productivity, again, dropping down a little bit, but nothing too disastrous. 2024 is a very poor year. Couldn't record productivity in 2023 because of avian flu, but last year it was up to close to 1.2, which we're really, really happy with. Next slide. Just very quickly then, Northern Ireland. There was one pair that bred in Northern Ireland in 2023, but they haven't bred there since. Unfortunately, we do have that problem of all of our roseate terns are at 2 sites really in Ireland, and we get optimistic every time a pair tries somewhere else, but they're realistically not establishing anywhere else, unfortunately, despite our best efforts. And then Steve was able to give me some information from France. I don't think there's anyone from France presenting here, so you can see the numbers from France there. There's a distance between Île-aux-Moutons and the other sites. It's about 150, 160 kilometers. So you can see that there's a bit of a switch happening there. And productivity in 2024 was about 0.6 for each of those sites, but was 1.3 for Ile de la Colombière in 2025. So a bit of a switch happening there. And I think possibly peregrine predation might be one of the problems at Île-aux-Moutons that's maybe leading to that switch, but I'm not fully up to speed on that one. Next slide. So that's it. That's my last slide. Gull predation is a problem that is getting worse, and I think we're going to have to do some lethal control this year. We tried to shy away from that as much as we can, but it's necessary. Common terns very slow at all our sites to recover from avian flu. Arctic terns are struggling as well. We're not quite sure why. That could be more of a food issue. Wind farm coming beside Rockabill potentially. That's a worry for us. better understanding of diet is something I'm really, really keen to progress in the coming years with DNA metabarcoding and methods like that. And I see Chantel is here. The RSPB are hoping to do a repeat of the demography paper that was done a few years ago in this part of Europe for the Roseate Tern population. So we're hopeful that will go ahead because we've loads of bring-in data, and it'd be great to update that after avian flu. That's me. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Brian, for staying up late or getting up early and coming to see us. Sorry, the time changed. Really appreciate it. All right, let's move on to the UK. Rebekah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the UK Colony Update. I'm Rebekah Goodwill. I'm the warden for Cooperative Island, which is the island that you can see in the photo here. We have over 20,000 breeding seabirds on the island, but the roseate terns, they only make up about 0.5% of that. So a very small number, but it is the only colony in the UK for roseate tern. And next slide, please. So aside from Cooperative, there are a couple of other sites in the UK where we get 1 or 2 pairs that breed each year. I think Brian just mentioned Landlough in Northern Ireland, but there are also 2 other sites in Wales last year where we had roseate terns breed. One of these is the Skerries, which usually has 1 or 2 pairs each year, and last year it had 1 pair and they successfully fledged 1 chick. And the other last year was Chenel Bay, which had 2 pairs attempting to breed, but unfortunately they had no fledglings. But this is still really important for us because it was the first time in 31 years that they had any breeding attempts for roseate terns at Chenel Bay. And then over on Cooperative Island, off the coast of England, where I work, we had our 3rd highest number of breeding pairs for roseate terns, which was 144. So a lot less than Rockabill over in Ireland and any of the other, but higher still than the rest of the UK one. It's a little bit above average, which is really good, and it's also really good that we seem to have recovered a bit from our the bad HPA years, which were in 2022 and 2023, and it's up from last year as well. On a similar note, which I don't have a picture of, the common terns have also started to show signs of recovery after we lost 80% of their population to HPAI in 2023 and 2022. And while they're nowhere near their pre-avian influenza levels, which was over 1,000 pairs, they are up 51% from 2024 at 536 pairs. Other tern species on the island have been doing really well, including sandwich tern, but unfortunately, a similar story to many of the Arctic tern colonies around the UK, our Arctic tern numbers are still decreasing from those years. We're down 20% on the year before. Speaking of HPAI, is still an ongoing issue for us on Cooperative. Almost all our seabird species on the island had some positive cases last year, while they're nowhere near the level of the two bad years that we had. And it did seem to primarily be affecting chicks last year for us rather than the adults. In our roseates, they were one of our least affected species. We had no adults come back testing positive, but we did have at least 2 dead chicks that came back positive. The actual number of positive cases in the chicks could have been higher because we don't sample every single bird. We don't test every single bird, sorry, we just do a sample. And next slide, please. Our productivity for roseates was down last year to 0.95, which is on kind of the slightly poorer end for us over on Cooperative. There were probably many issues that could have been affecting it. Like I said, we did have HPAI in the chicks, but also we had a big issue with food availability last year for pretty much all the surface feeding seabirds on the island, in particular our terns. We saw them bringing in all sorts of unusual prey items, including the ones you see on the screen here. A majority of the things that we saw them bringing in were 15-spine sticklebacks, crustaceans, and then we found this goby species, as well as we also found lump suckers and flatfish, basically nothing that a chick can eat. I think the weirdest thing we found were these 2 dead roseate tern chicks, which is why I put a picture. They were it's difficult to tell from the photos, but essentially the smaller chick is stuck inside the larger chick's mouth. No idea how it happened, but we have so many theories on that. It was probably, we were seeing tern chicks fighting over fish as they were coming in with sand eels. The ones that did come in with sand eels, they were fighting over it. So the probably most likely explanation is they were fighting over a fish and one of them got stuck in the other's beak and ended up choking. But it was just something very unusual that we found on the island among all the other weird prey items that were being brought in. Next slide, please. So on Cooperative, there is only a very small area of the island that is actually the roseate terns breed on. And these are the two areas that you can see highlighted on the screen here. We call them North Terrace and South Terrace, based on where they are on the island. We have been doing lots of habitat maintenance work in these particular areas, especially North Terrace. At the beginning of 2024, the seaward side of North Terrace partially collapsed. And so outside the bird season, we'll be doing lots of stabilization to it. Part of the stabilization works involved putting in dry stone walling, as well as burying scaffolding structure under the ground and the back of the terrace on the landward side of the terrace, just to help provide stable ground, as it does get all undermined by puffins that we have breeding on the island. As well as that, on both the terraces, we are putting in vegetation suppressant matting, as over 90% of our roseate terns breed inside nest boxes. So in the breeding season, obviously, we've been having issues with the vegetation growing up around the nest boxes, which has been making it difficult for chicks and adults to use them themselves. So we've been putting vegetation suppressant matting down and then putting the shingle on top of that. And last year, in the places where we managed to get that out, it seemed to work really well. So we're trying to do it now over a larger scale. And we have one of our other large projects we have going on the island is currently these two areas have a otter-proof predator fence around them. We've been having some issues with this predator fence, and so we are in the process of changing it as well. Unfortunately, we were meant to have got that done this winter, but all the winter storms have stopped that from happening. So it's our project for next winter now. And yeah, so that's everything that's been happening briefly everything that's been happening in the UK. And thanks for listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Rebekah and Brian. I know that both of you, it's getting late. So if anyone has any questions for them, I think we can open up for questions. The rest of the talk we'll save till the end, but just in case either of them have to go. Looks like there's a few questions in the chat that have already been answered, but if anyone has anything, feel free to raise your hand. All right, well, keep monitoring the chat. I'm sure it's really exciting to see what you all are doing over there, and I know we don't hear as much about it, so we really appreciate your time coming and sharing with us, and hopefully we can keep up that great collaboration. All right. And I actually lost internet during that presentation, but it didn't close down, so that was exciting. All right, now we're going to move to a little bit different weather area, all the way over to Florida with Ricardo.
Thanks, Alison. So yes, good morning, everybody. I'm going to give you the update for Florida for last year. Next slide. So yes, in Florida, we only have nesting of roseate terns in the extreme southern end of Florida and the Florida Keys and the Dried Tortugas National Park. The roseate terns in Florida are part of the Caribbean population. And so it wasn't a very good year. We had nesting on 3 colonies, 2 of them which are on rooftops, the Marathon Government Center, which is actually 2 buildings right next to each other, and Jaya Adif, another colony in Key West on a rooftop, and then Dried Tortugas National Park, which is our only ground nesting colony. Next. So I'll start with the smallest island or smallest colony. That's at the Dried Tortugas National Park. It's important to note that prior to the 1970s, this was the stronghold for the roseate terns. It's pretty much the only place they were found in large numbers. Sooty terns, which number up to about 60,000, and naughties, about 5,000 individuals nest on these islands. So of course, there's a lot of competition. There was a lot of rat predation in the past. Prior to a couple of years ago, they finally eradicated them from the entire islands. Anyway, the Roseate terns used to nest in that area between Bush Key and Long Key, but due to hurricanes in 2022 and the years before that, it was kind of separated from each other, and a lot of that habitat where they used to nest was gone. Long Key almost disappeared. Next, please. Fortunately, we started having more accretion in this is a picture from 2024. That center area was all white. That's sand and coral rubble. And that's where the roseate terns tend to nest. Again, most of the naughties and sooty terns are on Bush Key, the vegetated area, and part of the Fort Jefferson area. So that looked promising. Unfortunately, this past year, we only had 4 nesting pairs. I am getting a lot of this, all of the data from the National Park Service, so I have not been able to get out there for a few years, but I hope to get out there this year. Next. This picture is actually from 2006. In 2005, we had 4 hurricanes and 1 tropical storm that devastated the main stronghold of roseate terns in the Keys, which was an island offshore south of Key West, 5 miles offshore. At that time, you used to have about 250 to 300 pairs on that island, but since then it's been underwater. It did come up above water for 2 years in 2017, and then now it's underwater. So perhaps next year we're going to try to get some social traction equipment again out there, the dry tortugas, and maybe try to get more birds nest out there because it's good habitat, as you can see from the pictures. Next. Our second largest colony is the Marathon Government Center. At this one point, after the island disappeared offshore, this was the biggest colony, and it's as I mentioned, it's 2 government buildings, a county building and a state government building, which actually has a field office of ours. So you can ask for a better place for these birds to nest and be protected. So it is a rooftop colony. If you're not familiar with rooftop colonies, they tend to be tar and gravel colonies or rooftops, flat, large, and some might have a parapet, like a little wall, so the birds don't fall off. The chicks don't fall off when they're trying to take cover from predators, etc., or away from the heat. Next, please. So if you're not familiar with the rooftop colony, again, this is what it looks like. These roofs are covered with maybe an inch or 2 of pea gravel, and the coloration closely matches the coloration of their eggs and sometimes the chicks, especially for least terns. These 2 buildings are least tern and roseate tern colonies, mixed colonies. And roseate terns, at least on rooftops, like to nest next to edges, whereas the least terns nest out in the open. But as you can see, not so much the roseate terns chicks don't blend in so well, but the least tern chicks do blend in quite well on these rooftops. We only had 6 nesting pairs. As I mentioned, at one point we had between both buildings, we had over 100 pairs. So not sure where these birds are going, but they're definitely not going to the Tortugas or the other rooftop colony. Next, please. Our other rooftop colony, which was our largest, had 64 nesting pairs last year. This is a joint agency task force. It's on Navy property in Key West. But the building itself is actually composed of multiple agencies that are in charge of drug interdiction in the Caribbean. So it's a highly secure building. Again, very good for protecting the birds from human disturbance, anybody accessing up there. But in this case, the pea gravel was removed and was re-roofed, and now they're just shingles. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service required mitigation from the Navy, and that mitigation was in the form of these platforms. These are old pictures, so actually currently there's about 30 of these platforms and just little raised platforms way down with pea gravel, or in some cases pallets full of gravel. The reason I don't have recent pictures is because it's a highly secure building. I have a lot of trouble trying to get access to the Navy property to go on there, and even a harder time to get up on the roof. So we have to be escorted. We can't take cell phones or cameras or smartwatches, so I don't have really good pictures, but there's a lot more of these platforms. Next. So as I said, they've also used pallets, which are cheap, easy to get up there and take down. In case of a hurricane, for example, weighed down by cinder blocks. The roseate terns took to these quite easily. Least terns, not so much. Next. So this is kind of the trajectory of the population in Florida. It's not great. In 2005, when that island pelican show was still around and wasn't underwater, the population was between 250 and 300 pairs. But since then, of course, after that hurricane and the island disappeared, the population took a nosedive, but it gradually started increasing again. But as you can see from the red are rooftop colonies. And so the majority of them since then, since 2005, have been on rooftops. Took another plummet back in 2007, and hasn't really recovered too much, but we're just squeaking by. Next. So this is the actual island that disappeared, is now underwater. But what are we trying to do to recover the population or try to get the numbers back up? Next. So we've tried platforms. These are on Big Pine Key, these two large platforms, 15 feet high, on protected refuge property in the U.S. by the Fish and Wildlife Service. And on top, we put pea gravel on there, similar to what you might find on a rooftop colony, decoys, social attraction equipment. We've had these platforms built since 2019. Unfortunately, roseate terns have never taken to nesting on these platforms. These terns have, though, from the get-go, we didn't even use social attraction equipment or decoys for these terns. They just started nesting there on their own and have continued nesting on these platforms since then. So it wasn't a complete loss, but as you can see, there's a nest there at the forefront of this picture. Next. We proposed trying to put up some artificial habitats and pea gravel on the old 7 Mile Bridge, which is cut off on both ends. It's run by water, of course. Next. Unfortunately, the regulatory agency that owns this property did not give us permission to do so, citing safety concerns for people to get up on it because it is decaying. Although the concrete below it it's in some cases over 10 feet thick. But safety concerns for people to get up there and safety concerns for some of the habitat below it, mainly the coral attached to the bridge. But if we do get permission, it's been quite a few years since I asked for permission. It's, I think, getting close to 10 years. I may try to attempt getting permission again. Maybe leadership has changed their mind. And if we can tell them that the population is not doing so well, this would be an easy project and safe, I believe. We may be able to get permission. Next. Something else we're considering could be a raft or a barge. These pictures, I was the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the Maryland Coastal Bays program were kind enough to let me share this picture. This raft they used, I believe, and to attract common terns, and were very successful. So this is a potentially an idea to use in the Keys. There's a lot of protected waters, a lot of shallow waters. And if we can get funding for it, with permissions and all kinds of permits from different agencies, this might be something we may try in the future. Next. And that's all I got.
Thanks, Ricardo. And if you haven't yet, make sure you connect with Ruth Betcher. I know she's doing a lot of work with artificial islands. Maybe she can help you out with some thoughts.
Sure.
All right. Continuing on with the Caribbean population, we'll move over to the U.S. Virgin Islands with Victoria.
Hi. Oh, there we go. Good morning, everyone. I'm Victoria Beasley. I'm from the Division of Fish and Wildlife for the government of the U.S. Virgin Islands. So yeah, I'll give a very brief update for the colonies in the USVI. For those of you not familiar with the USVI, it's located just east of Puerto Rico. And the two large islands you see are St. Thomas to the west and St. John to the east. And the British Virgin Islands are to the north. So roseates nest within the months of May to July here, and 16 of our offshore keys have historical records of nesting terns. And they're shown here in this figure or map in the green boxes. And those colored red are where they nested this year, or last year, rather, in 2025. Next slide. So the graph on the left is the number of nesting keys roseates have used historically. So the lowest being last year with only 3 keys and up to 7 keys in 2016. So overall, definitely looking like a downward trend of the keys they are utilizing here in the USVI. And as for surveys, this year we conducted counts of adults that were seen incubating nests for a total of 58 breeding pairs for the entire USVI. This is the lowest number in 9 years and most likely ever. We're definitely seeing a drop in breeding pairs, which looks very concerning. You can see in the graph on the right, in 2016, we had over 1,000 breeding pairs. So it's a significant drop. And right now, DFW plans to continue monitoring nesting at roseates and looking for possible reasons for this severe decline, possible rat presence on the offshore keys. But please reach out if you're interested in doing any roseate tern research down here. And that's actually all I have. I'm very brief compared to the others, but thank you all very much.
No problem, Victoria. This is really impactful, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And definitely, if anyone has any thoughts, please share them in the chat. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Kate O'Brien, who's going to provide us with the all colony update for the Northwest Atlantic, or whatever she has decided to call it this year. We have a few different names, so she knows the correct one.
I wouldn't say I know the correct one, but bear with me as I might use them interchangeably. So I don't know, Alison, are you going to share my presentation, or would you like me to share it from here?
Oh, either way, which would you prefer?
I'm fine either way. It might be easiest for you to share it if you can. I don't know if the internet goes out, then I can share it, I guess.
I got that.
Yeah. All right, great. Thank you. Again, hi, my name's Kate O'Brien. I am somewhat relatively, well, I am new to helping coordinate the data collection for the Northwest Atlantic all colony roseate tern update. I just want to take a minute here to thank the people who have put the slides together before me. So thank you to Susie Von Ottinger and Carolyn Mostello, Mick Harrington, Rachel Stevens for your slide contributions. And I also just want to thank everybody very much for sending your data and bearing with my numerous questions. So next slide. So a little bit about roseate tern. We've heard from our friends in the Caribbean region, and we're talking about the Northwest or Northeastern or North Coast Atlantic. I guess it depends on, the listing documents call it one thing, we tend to call it another. What we have is we have 2 populations that were both simultaneously listed in 1987. The Northwestern Atlantic population was listed as endangered, and the Caribbean was listed as threatened. These species administratively are managed out of different Fish and Wildlife Service offices with different leads. So it's either Region 5 or Region 4. They are classified as distinct population segments, but they also they winter together. They use some of the same staging areas. They definitely share a lot in common off their breeding range. Next slide. So when I talk about the Northwest Atlantic roseate tern population, I'm really talking about the birds that are breeding from Quebec down to Long Island and kind of scattered in between. So no matter what word I use, I think we're all speaking the same spatial language, hopefully. Next slide. So as I've delved into this a little bit, I just wanted to mention a little bit of a brief history of Table 34. It was started by Brad Blodgett from the State Ornithologist for Mass Wildlife. So the data prior to 2002 were mostly compiled by Brad, and then Carolyn Mostello took it over from 2002 to 2021, and the service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Region 5, is working on it from 2021 to now. The table has a set of metrics that we use to try to keep our finger on the pulse of roseate tern. So we look at the number of nesting pairs, so peak and total, and also productivity where we have it. There's some little asterisks or little little symbols that we put when we don't, we want to kind of explain our data a little bit better. So if you got an asterisk, it's a pair that is not included in the total, but it's believed attached to the site, but no nests were located. A dagger is a site known to be productive, but which a rigorous productivity estimate was not available or cannot be properly calculated. Double plus sign means a crude estimate. P means preliminary, and ND means no data. 0 means I surveyed it and there are no birds there. ND means no data. And boldface usually means check the notes, consult them for additional details. A little funny thing about table 34, one would think that table 34 meant that there was this massive report associated with table 34, but apparently Brad just numbered all his tables. So this was, I guess he had 33 tables before this one. Next slide. So I'm just going to go really quickly through some of the results from our data collection efforts, and because the colony leads are really going to present on that. So here we have in Quebec, there were roseate terns reported nesting in Quebec, but they were, at least 2 of them were paired with common terns, so they were not counted. And then that was at Paquet Island, and then in Chenel Island, there was 1 roseate observed sitting on a nest, but its mate was not determined. There was another roseate there, but we're still not really sure of the nesting status in Quebec. And also, please do send me, if I'm misinterpreting your data, send me corrections. You'll have my email address at the end. Next slide. So again, Nova Scotia, we had 4 nesting pairs at Country Island, estimate 3 at Sable, 6 to 8 at Brother, and 2 at Gulls. And then next slide. The Northern Gulf of Maine, Eastern Ag had 69 pairs, Pond 13, Jenny 12, Outer Green had 1 lonely pair, Stratton 104, and Seavey in New Hampshire had 131. So next slide. Moving down to Cape Cod, Nantucket, South Monomoy had 20 pair. And oh, I want to say I'm reporting on the peak count, not the total count. So when I talk about pairs, that's the number I'm pulling for this presentation. And I think the happiest, well, maybe not a surprise, but the happy number here is 83 points, 83 pairs at Norton's Point down the Martha's Vineyard area. Next slide. So Buzzards Bay in Massachusetts seems to be the home for the majority of our northeastern, North Atlantic coast or northwestern roseate tern populations. Again, with Bird Island having 2,807 pair documented, Ram 1,203, Pennakees 23 pair. And then on to next slide. Central Connecticut had 28 pair at Faulkner Island. Next slide. Eastern Connecticut and New York, again, other standout is we've got Great Gull with 2,329 pairs counted. And then also we had some pairs or adults reported from Cartwright Point and also Lazy Point. And there are a significant number of birds, 90 adults at Cartwright and 20 adults at Lazy Point. The observations had to be done via boat or from a far enough distance where they weren't sure if there was nesting actually occurring. So in particular at Cartwright, there may have been nesting there, but we don't have a good document. So for now, we put little asterisks on those numbers and not included them in the total. Next slide. And southern Long Island in New York still has no reported nesting pairs of roseate. So we are definitely seeing a bit of a contraction on at least certainly on the southern end of the population. And I guess, the northern end, Quebec is looking doesn't really have a lot of pairs up there. I'll put it like that. They're mating with common terns, I think, probably due to lack of availability. Next slide. So our stronghold colonies remain strongholds when compared to 2024. There hasn't really been, too much of a shift in where the birds are nesting. Next slide. And then, so functionally, what does this mean? We've got 5 additional peak pair in Canada and 610 additional peak pair in the US. Our change from last year is at about 9.1%. And then the previous change was increased by about 13.76%. So in 2025, we had 77 peak pairs in Canada and 6,823 in the US, for a total of 6,900 pairs, nesting pairs documented. Most colonies had significant, some colonies had significant increases. Bird Island had a different, over 400 pairs additionally documented. Gull had more pairs, Norton Point as well, Stratton. You can look at the peak difference. Is what I did is just I calculated the difference in peak pairs and just graphed it out there, so you can see that most of our colonies have either significant or relatively minor increases. We do have some also minor decreases. Fun fact is Ram Island had no change from this year to last year. There's still 1,203 pairs nesting at Ram Island in Massachusetts. Next slide. So again, this is just another way of looking at our key colonies. We have a lot of our birds, like over 93% of them are actually at these 3 nesting colonies, which is kind of the epitome of putting your eggs in 3 baskets. And 2 of those areas are quite close spatially. Next slide. And again, the good news is that we seem to have 615 additional peak pairs. That's a 9%, over 9% increase, with the biggest increases being at bird and great gull and ram. Next slide. So what I wanted to wrap up and say is thank you to everybody for sharing your data and doing the hard work of restoring roseate tern. Each and every one of these pairs are hard won. They work really hard to manage these colonies. Certainly it's not easy. So we want to thank you for your hard work. And then also I wanted to mention that, at the time of listing in 1987, we estimated there was less than 3,500 pairs. We're up to 6,900 pairs in the Northeast DPS, which I think is, fabulous. But there are definitely challenges ahead. We know that the road ahead for these birds is not going to be easy, but the hard work is paying off. And I think that later on today, we'll talk a little bit about some of our SSA planning work, and we can talk a little bit more about the challenges. And yes, I definitely want to hear feedback on Table 34 because we've had some staff transitions in Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm trying to make sure that we're standardized in the way we interpret your data. So I can see a little bit of the comments, and I definitely want to hear back more from people so we can help carry this data set forward with the least amount of an interpretation, or at least with the correct interpretation. So thank you.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks for sharing that really important thought process behind making sure that we're collecting everything the same way year after year. And for those of you that don't know Kate already, which probably most of you do, she's been with the service for many, many years, working at Rachel Carson Refuge and now transitioning into our environmental services section. And we're really excited to have her helping with roseate terns and helping get that SSA finished for all of us.
Thanks.
Right. We're going to move over to our northern Atlantic Canada population, starting with North Brother Island, Nova Scotia, and small peripheral colonies.
Actually, I'm going to start with a small overview of the Canadian situation. So And then Shawn and Sarah are on, and they'll talk about our 2 core colonies. So Canada has seen a modest recovery in the numbers since the steep declines we all experienced in the Northwest Atlantic during the early 2000s. But our rebound in Canada it's taken much longer than what you have seen in the United States. But we haven't been able to do a complete full Nova Scotia-wide tern survey since 2016. So we could be missing some small pockets of birds outside of our core colonies, and the southwest of Nova Scotia is quite well surveyed. Historically, Canada has functioned as a 2-colony system with North Brother Island in the south and Country Island in the northeast, supporting most of our breeding pairs. But that structure has really essentially collapsed since 2020. Country Island has had declines, and Sarah will speak to that. And so now we have about 90% of our known Canadian roseate tern pairs concentrated at one tiny eroding island, North Brother Island. So even though our overall trend has looked, cautiously positive, that's because of North Brother Island and the increases we've seen there. So the system is really extremely vulnerable. And so outside of the 2 core colonies, as you heard Kate say, that in 2025, we saw some small scattered pockets of roseate terns at different islands. Productivity has been quite low at these non-managed sites, except for Sable Island, where there are no predators. And the roseates there, consistently, we have 3 to 5 pairs nesting. And so now I'm going to shift over to Shawn. The next slide is for Shawn to talk about. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, I'd like to give just a bit of a snapshot of some of the key, I guess, highlights from North Brother from 2025. Julie showed quite well on the map there that the island is located in southwest Nova Scotia, in the upper Gulf of Maine. The island consists of a colony of common, roseate, and Arctic terns, as our snazzy new logo, which is in the top left corner of the slide, shows. But consistently, 85 to 90% of these birds are common terns. Since I guess monitoring started in the early 90s, we've had about 600 tern pairs nesting. And that reported during our annual survey. In 2025, we were just under that average of about 600, and this was a little bit lower than the last 4 years, but I say we're just right around the long-term average of about 600 pairs. One of the bright spots for 2025 was the number of roseate tern pairs. We finished with a peak of 76 pairs, which is the highest number recorded since 2003 and the second highest number recorded since we've been monitoring the population on the brothers, thanks to work from Ted Dale. Majority of roseate terns do nest in nest boxes, but we do see in some years multiple pairs seeking out other sites where there's a lot of lateral cover, and this could be against rocks or even up against the back sides of the nest boxes. Very early in the season, 2025, there was a little bit of unusual predation to roseate and common tern adults. We ended up collecting 7 predated roseates and 1 adult common tern and sent them to the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative for analysis. And mammalian predation came back as the culprit for mortality in all these cases. And so what we did, we responded by collaborating, and we set out some mammal traps and also put up more camera traps to figure out what was roaming around. But unfortunately, they didn't detect anything, and we didn't witness any more adult mortality, or at least unusual adult mortality as the season went on. Unlike 2023 and 2024, 2025 did not bring apart any unusual chick mortality, thank goodness, though we don't measure fledgling success at this site. One of the key components of monitoring on the island is management of invasive non-native vegetation, and particularly radish. It can get pretty heavy and pretty dense in some areas of common tern and roseate tern nesting. And in the past, what we've usually done is just manually pulled in areas where it's very dense. But as many people know, this is time consuming and it really elevates the time spent in the colonies. So inspired by work by Liz Craig and some of her colleagues in New Hampshire, we're in the process of looking at the potential efficacy of using a hypersaline seawater solution to try to reduce growth of wild radish and some other non-native plants in nesting habitats. So we've gone through 3 or 4 years, and the solution is applied prior to the first eggs being laid. Preliminary results are quite encouraging, and I've put up a couple photos on the right-hand part of the screen. The top photo is one example of a control plot which did not receive the solution, and this is a photo later in the season. And you can see the plot is dominated by radish and some other vegetation, whereas just below that it's a photo of the paired treatment plot, and there was virtually no vegetation that grew in that in the area. It doesn't seem like the solution is affecting nest box utilization by roseate tern, so we're quite hopeful that the use of this hypersaline seawater solution will become part of our management of vegetation going forward. So, like I said, we still have 1 year of trials to finish with the roseate tern nest boxes. Okay, next slide. We monitor diets of all 3 species of terns using a combination of direct feeding observations, GoPro footage, photos, and SynDNA metabar coding. On the left is data just from direct observations of roseate tern diet. This is chick feeding, but also a little bit of mate feeding. And typically 80 to 90% of the diet consists of sand lance and herring. Those numbers were a little bit lower in 2024, but I think we suspect this is due to a large number of unidentified fish that were probably, in many cases, they were very small herring that we classified as unidentified. In 2025, the diet really was dominated by herring. 77% of observations were of those that group of fish. And this coincided with large schools of juvenile herring that we were able to observe during at-sea foraging surveys at some of the key foraging sites that we go and visit each year. Another part of our monitoring is actually looking at foraging routes of terns. So we determine the direction at which individuals come back to the colony with food. And I presented a couple graphs here for roseate tern data from 2021 to 2025. And it's quite interesting because it's allowed us to really parse differences between sand lance and herring, those 2 most important prey species. And essentially, pretty much all roseate terns coming back to the colony with sand lance are coming from a southerly direction, whereas those coming back with herring tend to come back from the east and a little bit from the south as well. And this has been really interesting because if we complement it with some historic GPS tracking data from the site, as well as our at-sea foraging surveys, we've really been able to pinpoint a few key foraging sites where they're getting sand lance roseates and getting herring as well. And there really are a limited number of sites that tend to be used each year. And just to wrap up before I pass it on to Sarah, Nick Knudsen just published his master's thesis, which looked at nest site habitat partitioning among roseate, Arctic, and common terns. That just came out in Avian Conservation and Ecology. And we're part of the large-scale GPS tracking study of roseate terns and common terns. I think Sarah's going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So we're really excited to be part of that big project as well. So. Yeah, so that's it. A few highlights from 2025 from North Brother Island. Turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name's Sarah Neima. I'm a wildlife technician working on Country Island. I'm presenting on behalf of Jen Rock. Unfortunately, it is March break here in New Brunswick, so she was not able to be here. But I'm gonna try and fill her shoes. So as Julie mentioned, Country Island is considered one of the 2 core colonies for roseates in Canada, but the numbers of breeding pairs there have been declining over time. You can see that in the left-hand graph there. The points are the number of roseate pairs. The bars are common and Arctic co-nesting pairs. And this decline has been occurring for the last 20 so years, despite having a successful predator management program on the island that was active up until 2019 that prevented gulls and corvids from nesting on the island. And this decline has been continuing, even though that was successful. But we did end up pausing that program in 2019 or after 2019 due to COVID and then HPAI that hasn't been resumed yet. Over the past 2 years, including 2025, only 4 breeding pairs of roseates nested on Country Island. Productivity has always been a minimum estimate for roseates at this site, since the fledglings are difficult to track in amongst all the other birds, since they move around quite a bit more. That said, the annual estimates for roseates do follow similar patterns compared to co-nesting terns, and overall we've seen relatively low values for all species in recent years. Most years, the productivity has been limited by fledgling survival. However, this past year, 2 of the 4 roseate nests that we had failed to hatch eggs, and those were lost due to predation. In terms of what's driving the trends at this site, there are a lot of variables to consider, including we've had signals of reduced availability of sand lance in recent years. And this topic was presented by master's student Ruby Schweihart at the AMBC last year. We're also investigating potential density dependent effects. This is just something we're thinking about and still exploring it. There was also the mysterious chick die-offs in 2023 and 2024. Luckily, we didn't see that in 2025, but it's still something we're concerned about. And there is, of course, the big shift in dynamics with return of corvids and gulls to the island. So lots to consider here. One thing that we really did want to flag, though, as important, is that there is a possibility that the roseate terns that nested on Country in the past may have moved elsewhere along the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. As Julie mentioned, there are some peripheral colony islands and other suitable islands near Country Island that haven't been surveyed recently. But as an example, in 2025, some colleagues of ours were doing other work nearby and detected roseates at a nearby island, Pancake Island, but they were not able to land and determine whether there was any breeding happening there, but they did see and hear them. And we also know that at that same island, some of our common terns that we had GPS tags visited that site. So we're definitely interested in exploring this, hopefully doing some broader surveys in 2026, although that depends on funding. Next slide, please. So in addition to the demographic monitoring we're doing, we have been part of the Tern, the collaborative Northeast Tern tracking network, starting for us with common terns in 2024 and adding roseate terns in 2025. So we deployed 10 path track tags on roseates on North Brother Island last year, of which 9 relayed data. You can see the map on the left shows local movements of those 9 birds during the breeding period. Of those 9 birds, 8 transited across the Gulf of Maine to Cape Cod, which you can see in the right-hand map. We've also included wind-leased areas for the US in white and Canada in black on that map. And we haven't done a lot of in-depth analysis on this data yet, but we're really excited about this fine scale kind of information and how it might be useful in identifying key sites for protection and flag potential pressures on the landscape. And the tagging work with roseates has been especially effective given the predictable movement of these birds and the fidelity to those sites, where base stations have been erected by collaborators in Cape Cod and also in Brazil, which leads to my next slide, please. We're really excited about this collaboration because this year is the first year we've collected a southbound roseate tern track from Canada all the way to Brazil. So that's the darker pink line there. Super exciting for us to get that data. And so thankful to the collaborators in Brazil listed there at the bottom of the slide. In addition, we also got a northbound migration from Brazil to Canada. That's the lighter pink line. This was a bird that was tagged in Brazil and ended up breeding on North Brother Island. We did have to recapture this bird to collect the data because even though it had been observed on the island for multiple visits in a row, it wasn't downloading any data to the base station. So the crew on the island managed to capture the bird and remove the tag, and we sent it across to PathTrack to get the data off of it. So lots of thanks to the team on North Brother who put in that effort, and lots of thanks to the team in Brazil who have allowed this data to be shared. Super grateful. And we're really excited to see what's going to happen in 2026. We're going to deploy another 10 tags on Roseate on North Brother. So looking forward to getting more data. And that's me. Thanks.
Oops, not turned on my mic. All right, thank you all from Canada. We'll move down the coast to Maine. Paula should be presenting.
Hi, I'm Paula Shannon. I'm with the Audubon Seabird Institute, and I'll be giving the update from Maine this year. For the last at least 15 years, the majority or maybe all of the roseate terns in Maine have nested on islands that we manage. There's been 3 consistent colonies, those on Stratton Island, Eastern Egg Rock, and Jenny Island. And then periodically we've had terns, roseate terns on Pond Island and Outer Green Island. Up until 2010, there was a small colony on Petit Manan Island, and we've occasionally detected a pair or 2 nesting further offshore. But the last time that happened was in 2012. So numbers have been similar to the last couple of years here. The colony on Stratton Island increased a little from last year to 104 pairs. This is following a decline in 2023 that was the result of a mink on the island. So they seem to be slowly recovering. And also notable, the colony on Jenny Island, which has been consistent at around 20 pairs for the last 10 years, declined this year down to just 12 pairs. We're not entirely sure why that is, but we did also have a decline in common terns. And there was a nor'easter that hit the island kind of mid-egg laying this year in late May, that a lot of terns were not incubating their nest during that storm. There was some abandonment and later re-nesting, so it may be related to those conditions that happened this year. On Stratton Island, this year affecting the roseate terns, we had a mink. It was lucky that we detected it early in the season in mid-May, just shortly after eggs started being laid. Found the first sign of it was a roseate tern dead on its nest. And luckily, we were able to catch that mink in 3 days, so it had minimal effect on breeding pairs. But we did find 4 adult roseate terns, carcasses that were attributed to the mink. We also had some black-crowned night heron predation on Stratton Island this year. It affected all the terns on the island, but it's believed that about 10 roseate tern chicks were killed by the night heron. Let's see. Productivity was okay this year. We notably had low clutch sizes on all of the islands except for Stratton Island. More 1 egg nests than 2 egg nests at most sites, which is unusual for us. But we think the low clutch size especially contributed to the lower productivity on Jenny Island. Only 1 nest had 2 eggs there this year. But aside from that, the chicks that did hatch seemed to do generally okay, though there was more death than usual on Stratton Island, but that is mostly attributed to the night heron. Let's see, the Pond Island colony, over the last 20 years, there's been a pair or 2 here and there. It's never really taken hold, but it does seem now that we've maybe got a small and consistent growing colony there. We've had nests for the last 4 years, and it's been slowly increasing to 13 pairs this year. So we're hopeful that that colony will continue to thrive. They struggled, I think, with aggression from common terns and getting a foothold where they could do well on the island, but maybe they've finally achieved that. And let's see, I guess the other thing we did this year was we continued to monitor the diet of the roseate tern chicks on Stratton Island and Egg Rock. And that followed the similar patterns we usually see with roseate terns on Stratton Island, primarily feeding their chicks sand lance, and on Eastern Egg Rock, feeding their chicks a mix of hake, herring, and sand lance, with herring being the primary prey item this year. Yeah, and that's the update from Maine. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Paula. All right, New Hampshire with Liz.
Thanks so much. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm Liz Craig. I'm with Shoals Marine Lab. And I'll be talking mostly about our tern nesting on the New Hampshire side of the Isles of Shoals on White and Seavey Islands, which has been managed for almost 30 years by New Hampshire Fish and Game, and we contract with them in the last 10 years or so. Next slide. So the general trends for New Hampshire this year, we had high census numbers, over 3,000 common tern pairs, 131 roseate tern nests counted. This was the third year in a row, I believe, that we had no Arctic terns nesting at this site. And in terms of productivity, it was, for our site, about probably above average for common terns in terms of productivity, and a bit below average for roseate terns, even though it was still relatively good at 0.8 fledged chicks per nest. We did have moderate predation pressure early in the summer from peregrine falcons, and then later in the summer from gulls, which is kind of typical for our site. Luckily, no large mortality events, no mass mortality observed with chicks. The weather was relatively dry this year and last year, which was helpful for chick survival. And we did observe so much herring in the diet of, it was a record for common terns. I think it made up something like 80% of the diet in common terns and about 50% of the diet in roseate terns, which is notable for us because we see our roseate terns primarily focusing on sand lance. So that was definitely notable this year. Next slide. So we've continued with a lot of the management and monitoring that we've been doing in recent years. During our census, we collect GPS locations for all the nests on the colony, and we've been doing that since we had to actually change our methods in 2020 due to COVID and no extra hands for volunteering to count all the nests. But it has been helpful for us to continue these efforts because now we get really high resolution spatial distribution of nests for which it's helpful for adaptive habitat management and hopefully for other research that we can do into the future. So we now have about 5 years of super high resolution spatial distribution of nesting on the islands. We've continued with habitat management using salt for vegetation suppression, and I'm really excited to hear how it's going up in Canada. So thanks for sharing that. I should mention that in the last few years, we've been, instead of using the hypersaline solution like we included in our publication, which I'm happy to share, hauling all that water is really heavy. And so the last couple of years, we've tried just using salt with, not in solution, and it's also been very effective. So if anyone's interested or is currently using that method and wants to talk, we're still trying out new things and having good success. I should say that we have noticed that the efficacy is much higher in dry years. In really wet, rainy years, the salt has less of an effect. So that's good to know. We've also continued putting out nest boxes for roseate terns, as well as chick shelters made out of little PVC elbows that we put next to all of the nests that nest in high grass or areas with low shelter. And that's been very successful. And then we're also continuing both common tern and roseate tern diet monitoring from observation blinds as well as from cameras, which is an ongoing effort since the colony was established for common terns, and we started this up in 2022 for roseate terns. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to mention some of the new and ongoing research that we're doing with terns in New Hampshire. You've probably heard of some of this. If you were here for the last few days, our colleagues were presenting research on some of these efforts, but we are continuing fecal collection for DNA metabar coding with Gemma, and we have a manuscript in review with Andrew Stillman comparing or doing the methods validation across visual and DNA metabar coding metrics. So hopefully that will be coming out in press soon. We're continuing to tag both common and roseate terns with GPS tags. Last year in 2025, we put out 4 tags on common terns and 10 on roseate terns. And we are planning to put tags out again for both species in 2026 if we're permitted. Those data are going into a number of different research projects including tern movements, both looking at local and long distance movements with Alia Caldwell and Nathan Fury at UNH and a number of other collaborators. And Alia has a new paper out in Waterbirds looking at long distance migration, so please check that out. And then another paper in review that actually Kim Lato mentioned in her talk yesterday. And Kim also spoke about her new directions in tern bioenergetics modeling yesterday. So we're excited for Kim to join the team this year as a postdoc. We're also using those data for interspecific niche partitioning with Caitlin Paniker, who is an undergraduate at Bowdoin, working on a senior thesis. And then finally, we're evaluating tag effects with Grace Guo and many other collaborators, and I'll be giving a talk later today about that. To wrap it up, those long-term diet data that we're using are also being compared with fisheries data in Nathan Fury's lab with Alia Caldwell leading that effort. We've got a really cool project looking at passive bioacoustics and remote sensing of common terns with Laura Klepper's lab and Mike Pallas's lab at UNH looking at passive bioacoustics and drones. And then finally, we're looking at the long-term data set to explore linkages between diet and environmental conditions and colony dynamics and how that all relates to reproductive success for common terns. Next slide. Is that all I put in? Oh, yeah, I did want to mention, I know we're talking about terns today, that at the Isles of Shoals, we are part of a number of other efforts for species on the Maine side of the archipelago. So there's long-term research on gulls throughout the Isles of Shoals. But I also wanted to mention for folks who are interested in collaborating that we've got in the last 5 years some exciting research and monitoring going on with long-legged wading birds on Appledore Island, Maine, and with black guillemots on Appledore Island and Smutty Nose. And again, these are the two most southerly islands in Maine, right on the Maine-New Hampshire border. And I think that's all I have. Next slide, I'm done. Oh yes, a thank you, a huge thank you to all the folks who've been involved in the long-term work that we're doing and the new and upcoming research efforts. So thanks.
All right, thanks Liz, and thanks for sharing all the great work you're doing. We're going to move it along to Buzzards Bay.
All right. Are folks seeing slides?
Looks good.
Oh,
Perfect.
okay, great. All right. So hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Guitart. I am Coastal Waterbird Specialist for the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, or Mass Wildlife. And I'm presenting today on behalf of myself and Carolyn Mostello for the Buzzards Bay 2025 summary. So Buzzards Bay is located in southeastern Massachusetts. It's that little square on the map inset on the top left corner. And we have three colonies, three roseate tern colonies in Buzzards Bay, which are indicated by the stars. And they are called Bird Island, Ram Island, and Pennakees Island. And these are all mixed tern colonies that support large numbers of nesting common terns as well. So going from north to south, first up we have Bird Island. In 2025, we reached a new record high of 2,807 pairs. And this is a 17.9% increase from 2024, which was our previous record high at 2,380 pairs. So this is very exciting and kind of the highlight of our talk today. Unfortunately, our productivity was fair this year. While common tern productivity on bird and ram can fluctuate quite a bit, our roseates are usually pretty consistent at around 1 fledgling per nest, but we had a decrease to 0.88 fledglings per nest. And we didn't have any significant predation this year, so we think that this is lower productivity due to a combination of exposure to the elements and particularly the combination with poor food availability in the early chick rearing period. At Ram Island, our roseate tern numbers stayed the same from last year with 1,203 pairs. Similar to bird, productivity at Ram was lower this year with 0.86 fledglings per nest. And again, we think that exposure and poor food availability in the early chick rearing period impacted this colony as well. And the last colony is Pennakees. Pennakees supports lower numbers of nesting roseates than bird and ram. We had 23 pairs this year, which is a 27.8% increase from 2024's 18 pairs, so that's still very exciting. Productivity at Pennakees was good this year with 1.55 fledglings per nest, but roseate terns at Pennakees typically fare better than at bird and ram, so we really weren't surprised at this pretty significant difference in productivity over at Pennakees. And just for an overall look at how Buzzards Bay numbers are doing, we are extremely excited to see a regional record high for a third year in a row. So this figure shows the individual colony population over time, and then there's a combined population indicated by the bold black line. And this increase is driven by the increase in numbers at bird this year. There's still actually quite a bit of room for nesting roseates at this colony, so we're hoping for continued increases in the coming years. And aside from productivity monitoring and our census, we continued a few studies this year. We collected fecal samples for common and roseate terns, mostly chicks, but some adults at Pennakees, but we did all three colonies, bird, ram, and Pennakees. And we've had some issues with blank sample contamination in the past. So kind of talking to Gemma, and then also our field techs this year came up with what I'm hoping is a pretty bulletproof protocol for collecting samples. So I'm hoping that we should have some more success with this year and get a good idea of what's going on with diet within the past few years. We also conducted the second year of our nest box configuration study on bird and ram. And this study is looking at the impact of different roseate tern nest box types and nest box arrangements on a couple of reproductive parameters. But I'm presenting on that talk later. So if you're interested, please check that out in our next session. And that is it for me.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to stick with Massachusetts for a little bit longer. And move over to Monomoy. Lean.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eileen McGurdy. I'm the biologist here at Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge. We are located off the coast of Chatham and consist of 3 offshore islands, North Monomoy Island, South Monomoy Island, which is the largest, and then on that small little island you can see right off to the west side of South Monomoy Island, which is Minimoy. And this year was a little different for us at Monomoy, where we did not have a crew specifically on the island for tern productivity monitoring. but we were still able to get a few things done. We did do a census, and we did a modified census this year, but our common tern nesting numbers were very similar to last year. We had 19,317. Our laughing gull numbers really increased, and we had 9,860. We had 22 pairs of roseates nesting. Our hatch success this year was a little bit better than last year. We had an 86% hatch success with 24 fledglings and a productivity of 1.09 fledglings per pair. Last year, we had a big issue with black crowned night herons in the colony and rats. And this year it seemed to be a little bit less, and we had much better hatch success and productivity. Next slide. So we had two interns in the colony this past year. We usually have at least 4. And the 2 interns that we had this year were really focused on invasives management, or in our case, for mostly predator management. But we were able to still accomplish a lot of different things. Like I said, we did a modified tern census this year. Basically, what we did is we have our colony gridded out in 60 by 60 meter grids. We followed a grid line east to west across the colony and surveyed only 20% of each of our grid lines. And then we extrapolated those numbers to come up with the numbers that I just reported. We were able to do a little bit of roseate tern productivity monitoring. We did set out our chick shelters and our next boxes, and we did have roseates that nested underneath some of our chick shelters. Not so much in our boxes, but mostly in the shelters. We had some nesting out in the open, sandy areas, and then typically where we find them in the vegetated areas. We were able to do a little bit of disease monitoring, and we did have a small issue in the colony this year. We sent 3 samples, 2 common terns and 1 laughing gull, to the National Wildlife Health Center, and the results came back as all 3 of them with salmonella, and the laughing gull had circovirus. We were able to do some common tern fecal sampling in conjunction with Gemma's project for the diet study. We did some predator monitoring with game cameras. We continued our herring gull and greater black-back gull harassment and nest destruction in the colony, which has really helped to keep those nesting numbers very low. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, we have the rat issue within the colony, and we were doing some surveys out there, and we did a little bit of management this spring. We did some dry ice treatment in some of our burrows, and I think we had a little bit of success with that treatment, as when APHIS came and did some trapping in our colony a little bit later, they did not end up trapping any rats in the area that we did the dry ice treatment early in the season. Next slide. So what we did not get done was a full census. We did not get to do feeding surveys. We didn't do the kleptoparasitism surveys, and we did not get to monitor common tern productivity at all. And I think we could increase our efforts in our roseate tern monitoring, because the numbers that we reported at like 22 pairs this season, I know is low. We're missing pairs. Next slide. Oh, laughing gull management. We didn't get to do that either, which we need to address in the future, because our laughing gull numbers are really, really going up. And we did not get to do prescribed fire as well. We have been attempting to do that for the past several years, and our colony the vegetation is definitely increasing within our colony and providing much more suitable habitat for the laughing gulls than the terns. All right, next slide. So these are our numbers of roseate tern pairs over the long-term data set that we have. As you can see, it bounces around quite a bit, and I really think that a lot of that has to do with the amount of effort we're able to put into finding the roseate terns in our colony. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. I think we have roughly about 50 pairs within our colony of 19,000 pairs of common terns. All right, next slide. And then our productivity is, it ranges from year to year, and I think part of that is also due to our monitoring efforts. But in 2024, you can see that dip down there, and as I said earlier, we had a real issue with black crowned night herons in our colony. This year, we were able to get out and do some control with black crowned night herons in the colony in late June and early July, which I think really benefited our productivity numbers. Next slide. And then the predation within our colony. Black crowned night hens have been a consistent issue in the colony over years. We have them coming in. We have a nesting colony of wading birds just to the south of our tern colony. And then over the past few years, we've had a real increase of black crowned night herons in our colony, coming in with their young, teaching their young to hunt in the colony. So last year and this year, we'll be focused on removing those black crowned night herons within the colony. We're still monitoring rats and looking at management of rats in our colony. And then we also do some other control for coyotes and the gulls within the colony. So we'll continue that, but we've definitely had some major issues over the past few years with predation within the colony. And last year and this year, we did have some night abandonment due to owl presence. So we'll see if that continues again this year. And I think that might be it.
All right. Thanks so much, Eileen.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Moving down the coast to Connecticut with Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Vagos from Stuart B. McKinney National Wildlife Refuge. We manage Faulkner Island, which is 3 miles off the coast of Guilford, Connecticut. It was an awesome year out on Faulkner Island this year. We had a productivity rate of 1.46, which we haven't seen since the early 1980s. And this is probably due to no known predation and lots of fish. So we had a lot of sandlets coming in to our island for both species. We had 28 nesting pairs this year. Common terns, we did a census and we had 1,630 nesting pairs. We did not survey for common tern productivity, but we did collect 80 DNA samples, eDNA samples for Project Poop, and this is our 2nd year of doing that. So we focus on common terns for that study. So we did 40 adults, 20 incubating, and 20 chick rearing, and then 40 chicks. This year, sandlets for both species was observed the most coming in. And thanks to everybody who helped with the common tern census. We had to pull in people from all over, and it was a great event. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Chris. It was a super fun event. All right. We'll move down to New York and Great Gull Island with Margaret.
Morning, everybody. I am Margaret Rebekah, and it looks like some formatting has gone wonky on my slides. I'm reporting on Great Gull Island for myself, Joan Walsh, and Peter Payton. Great Gull Island, if you're not aware of that, I have just realized somehow my map came off of this slide as well. Great Gull Island is a 17-acre island in the mouth of Long Island Sound. Next slide. We had a really busy year in a whole bunch of different ways. I want to take the occasion of this particular meeting to let people know, many of whom helped out with this effort to create sort of new materials and for Great Gull Island, that we have launched a new website. Great Gull Island previously had a website, but unfortunately the URL was allowed to lapse. So you can find it now at www.greatgull.org. It has, among other things, a much more detailed annual report than I will give today. I'm trying to keep this to a pretty tight 5 minutes. Next slide, if we still have it. There it is. We also managed this year in April of 2025 to publish the conservation plan that we have been working on for Great Gull Island. This is what was the result of a structured process, which again, a whole lot of folks who are in the online room contributed their expert input to sort of consider what needs to be done, what are the priorities, what are the major threats at Great Gull Island for the next 50 years or so. That is available in all its detailed glory at our website. Next slide. I'm going to go through our season chronologically. We start our field season in early May with a very intensive band resighting effort in order to try and track birds who are returning. That's an effort that's really led by Peter Payton to get some sense of what the population structure is doing. This year we put in 430 observer hours in blinds, with a shout out to Alison, who is just like an absolute resighting monster. That returned more than 1,300 adult banded terns. Of those, there were 227 metal field readable bands, red, and 1158 PFRs. That discrepancy between those two things reflects a couple of things. First of all, MFRs stopped being used as soon as PFRs became available, so there are fewer of them on birds in general, but also they're more difficult to read, and so they tend not to get us so many returns, even though they're important to read because those are among the oldest birds. Next slide. So just to give everybody in the room a little thrill about where your birds are getting to, this is just a table of where birds who are being resighted on Great Gull Island are coming from. Faulkner Island, as the closest island, of course, is kind of the winner in terms of how frequently we see their birds, but we are seeing birds from just about everywhere in the Northwest Atlantic. Next slide. This year, we have settled into a process now at Great Gull Island of every other year whole island censuses for all the common tern nests to get an actual count as opposed to an estimate of common terns. This year, 28 biologists in teams of 5 to 6. We had a large number of colleagues from off island join in, from Fish and Wildlife, from state agencies, from a bunch of nonprofits, and thank you to everybody who helped out. We broke the island down into 8 survey areas, and we had those teams of 5 or 6, excuse me, counting those areas simultaneously so that we could get through the whole thing in a single day. We're using Survey 123 on phones to record the GPS location of every nest and clutch size at the same time so that we're getting those two things. Next slide. That gives you an idea of every blue dot here is a common tern nest. So they are, you know, pretty much everywhere on the island except down in the riprap and on actual hillsides. We counted a total of 11,190 nests, which is extremely close, virtually identical number to the number we got when we had to do an estimate process a couple of years ago when we didn't get through the count in a single day. Next slide. We also do roseate tern censuses, of course, every year. That process takes about 5 people, about 3 days, because we're searching all the nest boxes, of which there are about 2,500 on Great Gull Island. All the revetment on Great Gull Island. Uniquely, the birds are nesting underneath the big boulders in the riprap that is piled up all around the shoreline. And increasingly, we're finding them in edge habitat between the flats where the common terns are nesting and those rocks. We are also now counting all of these using a Survey 123 form that gets us clutch size, and we're dividing what we're recording for them into their main nest site type, and including as many secondary nest types to try and do a better job of capturing habitat associations for these birds so that we can get some idea of what it is they're queuing in on. And we take GPS locations for them. Next slide. So that process of intensive searching for 3 days got us this year, I actually have to correct this number for Kate, a total of 2,331 nests this year. This is an all-time high for Great Gull Island for the time that roseate tern nest counts have been recorded. So we're excited about the rise in the total number of nests. Next slide. This gives you an idea of where roseate tern nests are found. As you can see, they're all around the edges, down into the riprap. This year, for the first time, 38% of all those nests were in nest boxes specifically, and that's interesting. Next slide. Because it reflects that the places where we're finding the birds are changing sort of over time. This just gives you, I wanted the slide to be a little cleaner than, every year over the whole time this has been recorded. But you can see that previously on Great Gull Island, the majority of roseate tern nests have been in the rocks under those big boulders that you saw people climbing around in. And we are now getting to the place where there are more roseate tern nests in nest boxes that have been put out for them than there are in the rocks. The numbers in the rocks are going down a little bit. Moreover, we're starting to find more of them in the open than has been typical in the past. And we're attributing that shift in location to a couple of things, but one really important thing is that the lower reaches of the riprap where the birds used to nest are increasingly too wet for them. So we think that these things reflect them trying to move up in elevation. Next slide. We also engage in provisioning monitoring every year. We maintain productivity plots, and we are doing intensive provisioning monitoring on birds in the plots. This year we had 221.5 observer hours. Those are all done in 1 hour stints through the period from hatching to when birds begin to fledge. When we're doing those, we're recording prey delivery, the time of delivery, the species to the extent that we're capable of doing that, the size of the prey item, and if possible, as we all know, if you've done this, sometimes you catch who got the fish, sometimes you didn't, particularly for roseate terns when they're in boxes. Sometimes the chick identity's pretty tough to get, and the parent identity. Next slide. I will say I've just realized that I didn't put a slide in here that showed you which kind of fish that they were bringing in, but the majority of fish for both roseate and common terns this year were sand lance. But this year we also had a really big business in bay anchovy. So that was kind of a new one on us. The entire list of fish at Great Gull Island is pretty lengthy. They're covering mackerel, they're covering herring, they're bringing in butterfish, which, as multiple people over the course of this meeting have noted, the terns, the chicks can't actually swallow. We're pretty interested in the variation in provisioning rates as a way to get some sense of how abundant food is. I think we're all pretty focused on the species of the prey, but I think it might be valuable for us collectively to start trying to compare provisioning rates as a way to get some sense of how seasons are going. Next slide. Productivity this year, to no one's surprise, common terns have slightly bigger clutch sizes than roseate terns, though this year it was on the low side for common terns. We had at 1.45 productivity on fledglings per nest on roseate terns. We're quite happy with that, but we are noting for, I think, the third year in a row that roseate tern productivity is higher than common tern productivity, and we're not 100% sure why that should be, why we're getting that pattern. Next slide. There has been some talk at the meeting, and I know that there's going to be a little more talk about this afterwards, about unexplained early chick mortality. We started having a problem with that back in 2021, and at that time we started running regular transects of the island to get some kind of an index of chick mortality. We just walk these transects every other day in a standardized way, recording the age of dead chicks that we find, their condition, and then we rebury them, go on and do it again the next day. We rebury them to ensure that we're not counting the same deceased chicks over again. At this point, we know that when chicks are moribund or already dead, the common terns are picking them up, flying them away from their nests and dropping them. And so there's constant renewal along this transect of dead chicks. We have noted over the time that we've been tracking this mortality by using this transect method, we do not find dead roseate tern chicks this way. That isn't to say that there is no mortality from roseate tern chicks, just that they do not end up on this transect. We have a couple of very limited observations of roseate terns similarly picking up chicks that are moribund and flying them away from the nest, but dropping them in the water. So this method probably is not getting us a direct measure of roseate tern mortality, but as far as we can tell from our intensively watched productivity plots, the unexplained chick mortality that has sort of come and gone over the last 5 years or so doesn't seem to include the roseate terns. Next slide. And I just want to close by saying this last year, we also, this gives you a sense, this graph, of the age of chicks that are being found along that set of transects. And you can see that early on in the season, of course, it's very young chicks. And then as you get a little farther into the season, naturally, the chicks that you're finding are somewhat older. This year, because we have started some new vegetation management activities that have us going back to the island in August, when we arrived in the second week of August, we discovered a great many dead fledglings, common tern fledglings, all of them. It was not clear exactly why there were so many fledglings still on the island. Some of them were birds from our productivity plots that we knew to have left, and who had apparently come back. All we know at this point is that those birds that passed while we were actually on the island doing the vegetation work, in other words, where we had fresh carcasses, were extremely low weight. So it appeared to be a starvation event. But it's really made me aware, especially that keeping track of what's going on in the post-fledging season might be something important that we need to add. Next slide. And I will hand it over to Alison from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Margaret. And thank you everyone for sharing all the amazing work you all have been doing this past year and way beyond. We're running a little behind, so I think maybe we'll take a quick break of maybe a 5-minute bio break. And I'm sure a lot of people have some comments and discussion they want to do. Let's hold that until after our next 2 colony talks. So if everyone wants to head out and report back at 10:27.
Hey, Allison, I'm going to stop the recording now, if that's Allison and Suzanne, because
Sure.
I think we want to. Okay, great. And we can start it again.
Oh, thanks. Okay, thanks. Perfect.
Yeah, sorry. I just.
Oh, that's okay.
Sorry, I'm leading us astray from the schedule.